stripping to the essence, struggles of our day, times of change and conflict when we choose our way. God of truth and beauty, poet of the word, may we be creators by the Spirit stirred, open to your presence in our joy and strife, vessels of the holy, coursing through our life.
Good morning and welcome to First Christian Church of Ash Grove. We're so glad that you are here to worship with us today on the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany. We have one quick announcement, and that is simply that we ask that you look at the email that was sent this weekend. It addresses both the board minutes and the upcoming newsletter. Then, in terms of our concerns this week, we ask that you continue to lift up Vivian Goppinger. She is doing better, but she can use another week of prayers just to make sure she gets back to 100%. So thank you for those prayers. And then also, Ellie and Larry Steely's friend Kay needs our prayers. Her cancer has returned, and the Steelys have gone up to Iowa to visit her for one last time. So pray that they have a good visit and a safe trip home, and that their friend Kay has a peaceful transition. Now let us turn to our call to worship. We come together as a congregation of believers. We give thanks to God with whole hearts. We express our gratitude by passing on our gifts, given by our Creator, the author of our journeys. Awe before God is the beginning of wisdom. We can count on God's righteousness and faithfulness. All who approach God in fear have good understanding. We call on God to empower our worship. you, but there are hymns I have sung my entire life without ever noticing the words, let alone thinking about them. And this phrase in our last hymn is one of them. There is no shadow of turning with thee. What does that mean? Even when I took Psych 101 in undergrad, I didn't understand it. It didn't register with me. And I have to admit, I'm still not sure what the turning with part means, unless it means dancing with God. Yeah, at least for now, until one of you corrects me, I think that is how I will interpret it. There is no shadow in dancing with God. But this shadow part, what does that mean? Carl Jung said our shadow is the unknown dark side of our personality. In this regard, for God, there are no unknowns. God knows God's self, and God knows us. In short, God's seen it all, and there's nothing we can do to hide from God. Every person you know, no matter how good, has a shadow side. You have a shadow, I have a shadow, and organizations and churches have shadows as well. And here's another sad fact about human nature. Even though we aren't too good at recognizing our shadows, we are really good at picking up on them and projecting our shadows onto others. Normally, the thing we love to hate most in others is the very thing we hate most in ourselves. But we continue to deny it. Jesus is the light of the world and comes to shine light on what is hidden within. Like branches on a tree that cast a shadow, we must face what is hidden within, so that as the one body of Christ, our shadow does not become a stumbling block to any. As we come to the table of the Lord today, let us receive the light that Jesus gives towards that end. Let us partake together.
Many are the light beams from the one light. Our one light is Jesus. Many are the light beams from the one light. We are one in Christ. Many are the gifts given, love is all one. Love's the gift of Jesus. Many are the gifts given, love is all one. We are one in Christ.
Our reading today is from 1 Corinthians 8, 1-13. I am reading from the Living Bible. In this letter to the Corinthians, Paul is addressing a number of their questions. Next is your question about eating food that has been sacrificed to idols. On this question, everyone feels that only his answer is the right one. But although being a know-it-all makes us feel important, what is really needed to build the church is love. If anyone thinks he knows all the answers, he is just showing his ignorance. But the person who truly loves God is the one who is open to God's knowledge. which is wisdom. So now, what about it? Should we eat meat that's been sacrificed to idols? Well, we all know that an idol is not really God, and there is only one God and no other. According to some people, there are a great many gods, both in heaven and on earth, but we know there is only one God, the Father, who created all things and made us to be his own, and one Lord Jesus Christ, who made everything and gives us life. However, some Christians don't realize this. All their lives, they have been used to thinking of idols as alive, and they have believed that food offered to the idols is really being offered to the actual gods. So when they eat such food, it bothers them and hurts their tender consciences. Just remember that God doesn't care whether we eat it or not. We are no worse off if we don't eat it and no better off if we do. But be careful not to use your freedom to eat, lest you cause some Christian brother to sin, whose conscience is weaker than yours. You see, this is what may happen. Someone who thinks it is wrong to eat this food will see you eating at a temple restaurant, for you know there is no harm in it. Then he will become bold enough to do it too, although all the time he still feels it is wrong. So because you know it is all right to do it, you will be responsible for causing great spiritual damage to a brother with a tender conscience for whom Christ died. And it is a sin against Christ to sin against your brother by encouraging him to do something he thinks is wrong. So if eating meat offered to idols is going to make my brother sin, I'll not eat any of it as long as I live, because I don't want to do this to him. More often than not, we think of our gifts, and particularly the gift of our freedom, as a gift from God. But rarely do we consider how these gifts, even the gift of freedom, can be easily turned into a stumbling block for others, or what this passage points to, spiritual abuse. In the book, Let Your Life Speak, Parker Palmer tells us we have the power to project either shadow or light into some part of the world and onto the lives of the people who dwell there. We must be intensely aware of the interplay of inner shadow and light, lest we do more harm than good. So besides sharing our gifts, we must become aware of the shadow side of our gifts. One pastor I heard speak on this was incredibly eloquent, but he said he knew at the age of 10 or 11 or 12 or something like that, that his eloquence carried with it a great shadow. He had won an award for an essay he wrote at that tender age, and his picture appeared on the front page of his local paper, and his ego swelled along with his pride. So to this day, it is a challenge for him to not chop other people to pieces with his artful turn of a phrase. We may not sacrifice meat to idols anymore, but we still have idols these days, like pride or principles. Good things can be idols too. Anything that matters more to us than God. And yes, sometimes the shadow side of our gifts become the idols that become stumbling blocks to others. Normally, the best thing about us or others is the worst thing as well. Ever hung out with someone who's really fun? It's great until you're exhausted and just want to chill for a while, right? Or say it comes time to pay the bills, but they're nowhere to be found and have no money anyway because they've spent it all on a good time, right? Worse, the fun person with no accountability will blame others for being irresponsible. This happens. So what do? Because God knows we need some fun in our lives, right? Along with all the other gifts God has created us to give. Sometimes, though, our shadows can be so self-defeating, it's enough to make us want to give up. Even those of us with the brightest smiles grow weary sometimes when things don't go our way, and there really is a time for giving up. Perseverance will only get us so far. But if we stop and take inventory of how hidden shadows silently affect our behavior, relationships, and circumstances, we will indeed learn to stand taller in the light without harming others or ourselves. Rather than denying our shadow and sweeping it under the rug, we must take an inward journey with Jesus as our tour guide. Palmer tells us that we must go in and down into our shadow. As we do so, we will meet the darkness that we carry within, the ultimate source of the shadows that we project onto other people. If we do not understand that the enemy is within, we will find 1,000 ways of making someone out there into the enemy, becoming Christians who oppress rather than liberate others. Like Paul said to his letter to Corinth, take care that this liberty of yours does not become a stumbling block to others. Our gifts, the best thing about us, must not go unchecked. And so, let's take a quick look, and yes, maybe a painful look, at our greatest gifts and our favorite shadows. Parker Palmer tells us there are 5 shadows that we all fall into sooner or later. And if you can't relate to what follows, you're probably stuck in denial and need to go back and review last week's sermon. That's just a joke, okay? Remember, we don't want to take ourselves too seriously. It's okay to laugh at ourselves as we face these hard truths. Shadow number 1, insecurity. When we are insecure about our identities, we create settings that deprive other people of their identities as a way of buttressing our own. Have you ever required that someone else be less in order for you to be more? But Palmer tells us there is a gift available to all who take an inner journey. The knowledge that identity does not depend on the role we play or the power it gives us or others. Our identity depends only on the simple fact that we are children of God, valued for who we are. Shadow number 2, battle mentality. When we see the universe as a battleground, hostile to human interest, we create self-fulfilling prophecies. The tragedy of this inner shadow our fear of losing the fight is that we create conditions where people feel as though they are at war. But, Parker reminds us, the universe is working together for our good. Reality is not out to get anybody. Yes, there is death, but it is part of the cycle of life. And when we learn to move gracefully with that cycle, a great harmony comes to our lives. The spiritual truth is that harmony is more fundamental than warfare. If you fight all your battles on your knees, you win every time, and so does everyone else. Shadow number 3, taking control. We touched on this last week, but Parker Palmer says it better than I did. This is the unconscious, unexamined conviction that if anything decent is going to happen around here, we are the ones who must make it happen. We impose our will on others, stressing relationships to the point of breaking. But ours is not the only act in town. Not only are there other acts out there, but some of them are better than ours. We learn that we need not carry the whole load, but can share it with others, liberating us and empowering them. We learn that sometimes we are free to lay the load down altogether. It's okay to share the glory. Shadow number 4, fear of chaos. Here we are deeply devoted to eliminating all remnants of chaos from the world. We want to organize and orchestrate things so that messiness will never bubble up around us and threaten to overwhelm us. But chaos is the precondition to creativity, as every story of creation has it. Even what has been created needs to be returned to chaos from time to time so that it can be regenerated in a more vital form. When we fear chaos and try to eliminate it, we invite death, for the ultimate answer to all of life's messiness is death. A pop artist named Pink sings, "If you stumble, make it part of the dance. Creativity is messy." Shadow number 5, fear of death. We live in denial that all things must die in due course. When we deny this, we often demand that the people around us keep resuscitating things that are no longer alive. Failures are little deaths. Ever been so nostalgic that you can't live your life in the present? Can't think, let alone see a future? I've been there. But we need not fear death, the end of things, whether failure or death, because each ending clarifies the steps that need to be taken toward truth. Out of death comes new life. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the woman who wrote on death and dying decades ago, said that the most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. beautiful people do not just happen. And beautiful people are not perfect. Brene Brown, who was in our Wednesday stretch this last week, wrote her first book was entitled The Gifts of Imperfection. In it, she said, glamour demands perfection, which leads to violence. But beauty comes from imperfection, when our flaws are transformed by love into something wonderful, divine, and unique. Embrace your shadow side and know it, and be beautiful as you struggle to overcome it imperfectly. In other words, smile with laughter, but be sensitive to those who aren't yet in on the joke of God's wonderful and most redeeming grace. Scott M. Peck says that there are leaders, men and women, in all cultures and at all times who enjoy life with gusto, yet face death and accept it. They do not work productively, but creatively, and they obviously love their fellow human beings, whom they manage with a spirit of both intent and result. Productivity weighs heavy and measures another, but creativity bounces light and inspires all. God's desire is for you to shine, even when you feel like giving up. Even when our shadows get in the way, screw things up, and create a mess. Though, simply put, we cannot overstep our shadows, God is faithful even when we are not. We can overcome our shadows by receiving God's grace. When we allow God to shine the light of truth on our inward darkness, and we refuse to cower in the face of it all, we are able to receive all the gifts that God wants to give. Don't manage with a measuring stick. Manage with creative courage. Jesus, the light of the world, at the center of our being, radiates light. There is no shadow in dancing with God. Receive God's creative courage and bounce light. There is power in facing the truth of our darkness.
Well, now this is the light of mine, yeah, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, now this is the light of mine, yeah, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, now this is the light of mine, yeah, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, gonna let my little light shine. Well, Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day, 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 gonna let my little light shine. Well, this the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, now this the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, now this the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day, 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 gonna let my little light shine. every day, every day. Gonna let that little light shine. Monday, Tuesday,
Peace came from above.
Wednesday,
Told me to have more faith.
Thursday,
Gave me a little more grace.
Friday,
Told me to watch and pray.
Saturday,
Told me what to say.
Sunday,
Gave me the power to find.
with the light of mine, with the light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. With the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. With the light of mine, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, every day. Gonna let that little light shine. Well, with the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, with the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. With the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day, 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 every day. Gonna let that little light shine.
Our benediction today is a little longer than most, and you have more likely heard it before, but I think it fits. It is called Our Greatest Fear by Marianne Williamson. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Go in peace, dance with God, and shine.
Love I leave with you, my friend. Agape love in all you do. Love I leave with you, my friend. I give to you so you can give to others too.